Welcome to Iconoclasts. We try to think the unthinkable during these programmes, but sometimes the news agenda catches up with us. The proposition that the mentally and morally unfit should be sterilised might seem at first sight radical to the point of wackiness. But earlier this summer, a local authority in the Midlands applied to the courts for permission to force contraception on a 29-year-old woman because her social workers didn't think she was mentally up to decisions about having children. The judge said no because that would, as he put it, raise profound questions about state intervention in private and family life. Professor David Marsland, tonight's iconoclast, would, I suspect, have said yes. Once memorably described as Mrs Thatcher's favourite sociologist, he has academic positions at both Brunel University and the University of Buckingham. And Professor Marsland, just to be absolutely clear, you are talking about irreversible sterilisation, not simply contraception.
That's right.
Well, I've got three expert witnesses with me to test your arguments. We'll hear from them in a moment or two. Let's first hear Professor Marsland's argument, which he recorded a little earlier.
The context of my involvement with the issue of sterilisation is child protection. Children are abused or grossly neglected by a very small minority of inadequate parents. Abusive and neglectful parents are not distinguished from other parents by disadvantage, poverty, or exploitation. What marks them out are a number of moral and mental inadequacies caused by, first, serious mental defect, second, chronic mental illness, third, drug addiction, and fourth, alcoholism. We have to prevent such people from abusing or gravely neglecting children. More than one child at worst, any at all at best. Short of lifetime incarceration, and much preferable in moral and financial terms alike, is permanent sterilisation. This is the only way to reduce and control the killing, torture and neglect of our children. Decisions would be taken by and within the child protection system, involving social workers, the police, and crucially and ultimately, the courts. Perpetrators should be prevented from producing any more children and from multiplying their victims. My father was for nearly 40 years a nurse looking after the needs of what were then called mentally defective people. One of his and his colleagues' duties was to ensure the segregation of male and female patients in the 4,000-bed asylum in which they worked. From the 1970s on, the asylum system was replaced by so-called community care. Patients were decanted into various kinds of less controlled situations, ranging from the excellent to the appalling. Female ex-patients became subject to widespread abuse. This was unintentionally encouraged by social workers and others who argued that everyone had a right to cohabitation, marriage and a family, and that everyone was capable of all this, given suitable social work support. In consequence, unfortunate women had a string of children by different fathers, leading to some of the worst cases of child abuse and neglect. It seems to me that those suffering the most severe mental defect, subject to what might better be called learning impossibilities than learning difficulties, can only be properly protected from themselves by sterilisation. Chronic mental illness is a less clear-cut case, since recovery is possible. It is nonetheless responsible for much of the worst child abuse and neglect. Even with modern medications and a level and quality of care which is rare and unlikely to be produced, mental illness, including not least acute depressive illness, is responsible for much mistreatment of children. When it is chronic, persisting despite care over 5 years and more, further abuse and neglect of children is unlikely to be prevented other than by sterilisation. In the public media, calculation of the costs of drug addiction are too often limited to the price of crime and unemployment. A much more severe price is paid by the children of addicts, trapped, as so many of them are, in chaotic and violent lives. Where drug addiction is chronic, Where treatment has failed or been refused, the lives of their future children can only be protected securely by sterilisation. The same argument, and covering a very much wider scale, applies to alcoholism as to addiction to other drugs. Families where either the father or mother or both are alcoholics commonly mistreat their children by occasional serious physical abuse and regularly by the gross neglect generated by lives of disorderly chaos. They can be plucked into the relative safety of childcare, fostering and adoption. But why should we allow further predictable victims to be harmed by the same perpetrators? Here too, sterilisation provides a dependable answer. The main objections to my argument seem likely to be, first, in terms of rights. In my view, rights is a grossly overused and fundamentally incoherent concept. Stalin's Soviet constitution was packed full of rights and an alibi for terror. Neither philosophers nor political activists can agree on the nature of human rights or on their extent. Alistair MacIntyre influentially claims that rights are as fictitious as witches or unicorns. What matters is freedom and democracy. A free and democratic society has a duty to protect its children, if necessary, by means of sterilisation. Second, in terms of potential abuse of the procedure. This argument would inhibit any and every action of social defence. It should be ignored except by anarchist utopians. Third, in terms of practical ineffectiveness, since perpetrators may pop up unpredictably. My answer, partially effective control of abuse and neglect of children, is much better than none. We could much improve its effectiveness by better measurement and assessment of all parents at the start of first pregnancy. Fourth, in terms of symbolic associations with Nazi policies and actions. We should condemn absolutely and unreservedly Nazi abuses of sterilisation, but make our own rational judgments as best we can about the use of sterilisation in democratic societies. My conclusion is this. Currently, we attend to child abuse and neglect by spasmodic prosecutions, by providing extravagantly expensive and grossly ineffective so-called support, and by periodic bouts of moral outrage. As cases continue and escalate, we need a more honest and more radical approach. Sterilisation of at-risk parents, male and female alike, is its name. I do not make this plea in terms of any spurious children's rights, but because it is illegal, wrong and wicked to harm children.